Hey guys, and welcome back to Manga, where stupid shit ensues, but today I finished yet another season of what is quickly becoming kind of one of my favorite animes. But today, or yesterday I should say, yesterday night, I finished Sailor Moon S, and I decided that I kind of wanted to talk about it since I've talked about the previous two seasons of Sailor Moon, so might as well talk about this one. Finishing Sailor Moon S means I'm officially a little over halfway through the original 5 seasons, a little over 120 episodes now, so I got about 70 episodes to go, which is exhausting, but to be honest, I've been enjoying it quite a bit, so I just haven't wanted to really stop watching it. But Sailor Moon S is the 3rd season and the original 5 seasons of Sailor Moon. It's 38 episodes long, and it aired originally in spring of 1994. It's kind of weird because the S in Sailor Moon S stands for Super, but then they have a series called Sailor Moon Super S or Sailor Moon Supers, so it doesn't really make sense, so I'm just going to call it Sailor Moon S since that's what's referred to pretty much everywhere else. But the long and the short of my opinion on Sailor Moon S is that it is a really strong season to Sailor Moon, and is way better than Sailor Moon R, like in every aspect. And in a lot of ways, I think it's kind of better than the original Sailor Moon just because it just does it so well. And it's a really interesting story, and it's really intriguing, and it's just really fun without being over the top and confusing, kind of like Sailor Moon R was. Honestly, this puts Sailor Moon R to shame, but unfortunately you have to understand Sailor Moon R for parts of Sailor Moon S to make sense. But like I said, 38 episodes, which means it's the shortest by far out of the 2 previous seasons. I believe Sailor Moon R was 43 episodes long, and then Sailor Moon, the original, was 46 episodes long, so it's by far the shortest. It comprises of one story arc exactly, which is nice. I like the fact that it isn't kind of like Sailor Moon R, where it attempted to split it up into 2 story arcs, one being really strong, one really weak. It just has one really strong story arc throughout the entire season. And it's a really enjoyable story arc to the point where it's like, it doesn't feel like it gets old, kind of like Sailor Moon R. Somehow, even a shorter story arc got kind of dull after a couple episodes. But starting off with the visuals kind of, from at least the original Sailor Moon, got a bit better, and it's kind of noticeable. Otherwise, it's not incredibly amazing looking, but like I said with the previous 2 seasons, this anime is damn near 2 decades old, so it's not gonna look amazing, but it still looks pretty damn good for being released in 1994. Unfortunately, the same complaints that I had in Sailor Moon and Sailor Moon R apply to Sailor Moon S, with the visuals and the fact that they reuse animations quite a bit in Sailor Moon S, and I feel like there's just going to be a consistent problem throughout the entire season. Obviously, for the transformations, there's only so many interesting things that you could do, so they constantly reuse animations for the transformations. I'm not a huge fan of that, but otherwise it's fine. That's really my only complaint. Now, in terms of voice acting and music, the voice acting is pretty much the same as the previous 2 seasons, save the fact that they add few new characters in for the new story arc, which are the new characters are voice acted fine, so you don't really mind it. It's fine. Sailor Moon has not really had a problem with voice acting. I've been watching it personally with English dubs, and I haven't had really a problem with the voice acting. I've complained about Usagi's voice actor being annoying and Chibi Usa's voice actor being annoying in Sailor Moon R, but that's just because the characters more than anything else. It's just how it is. Otherwise, the English voice acting is fine. I enjoy it. Even though I feel like Usagi and Chibiusa's voice actors can be annoying, it's just intentional. Otherwise, they're fine voice actors and they do their part. Now, in terms of the music is a huge jump in quality over what was in Sailor Moon R. I feel like Sailor Moon R's music was kind of weak. It was fine, but it was not like incredibly memorable. Sailor Moon S's music has a shit ton of soul, and really it's just a unique sound from what the rest of the series has been doing. And finally, for the first time in the series, every Sailor Guardian gets their own unique transformation theme song. Instead of it all being Sailor Moon transformation theme song, all the Sailors Guardians get their own transformation theme songs, and that's really cool. Really, they should have done this from the outset, like made every Sailor Guardian have their own transformation theme song, because I don't know why they didn't. Pretty much every Sailor Guardian has their own transformation theme song, past and present, and it's just really cool, and they all are really unique sounding as well. Otherwise, there are some songs that are reused from previous seasons, like they did in Sailor Moon R, but otherwise, there's a lot of new songs songs in this season, and they're all really good and sound really good. So the soundtrack is banger. I really like this soundtrack. It's way better than Sailor Moon R's soundtrack, and honestly, it kind of competes with Sailor Moon's soundtrack, although I feel like Sailor Moon kind of is a hard soundtrack to beat just because Sailor Moon's a classic. But classic status withstanding, there are some songs in Sailor Moon S that I feel like are better than what the original Sailor Moon did. But overall, Sailor Moon Super's soundtrack is really, really good. Like, it's banger, honestly. I really enjoyed a lot of songs on here. It just had a lot of soul, and I felt like it was really enjoyable. Now, the story and characters, like I stated previously, Sailor Moon S has one story arc spanning 38 episodes. I feel like the fact that keeping it within one story arc was a good idea because it just keeps one consistent story throughout the entire season, and I feel like that does really well for this story. I feel like the story is strong and they keep it simple, kind of like Sailor Moon. I felt like Sailor Moon R kind of got carried away, but it kind of got confusing near the end, kind of making the story complicated. Sailor Moon S keeps it simple and enjoyable, and honestly, that's just all Sailor Moon has to be, really. It doesn't have to be like some overly complicated storyline. It just has to have pretty much enjoyable, kind of popcornish superhero vibe to it. And honestly, that's what Sailor Moon S is. It's just popcorny good villains versus superheroes, or superheroines if you want to put it that way. And it's done really well. Now, it does have some heavy story elements to it, and it does take kind of like some of what Sailor Moon R was doing with the kind of complicated story, but it doesn't go overboard with it. So there are some complicated story elements to Sailor Moon S, but it's nothing crazy like Sailor Moon R did. Now, Sailor Moon S has story ties into Sailor Moon R, so you have to watch Sailor Moon R to understand Sailor Moon S, kind of like you had to watch Sailor Moon to understand Sailor Moon R. There really is no way of skipping around this series because it all ties together. Characters return from Sailor Moon R, and while I felt like Sailor Moon R was overly complicated in some parts, the return of characters from Sailor Moon R worked very well in Sailor Moon S. That being said as well, the new characters that they introduce are done really well as well, in my opinion. I feel like also the new villains are quite enjoyable, honestly, and have a lot of personality. And I feel like that has a big advantage over Sailor Moon R, where I felt like the villains were kind of weak. My only complaint with Sailor Moon S in terms of the story is that near the end it starts to get confusing and it kind of has a weak ending, to be honest. Up until the ending, it's a really strong, and then about the last 5 episodes maybe, it kind of falls apart, and it's kind of disappointing. It doesn't fall apart completely, but it just feels kind of confusing near the last 5 episodes, to the point where I was like, okay, this kind of ended weak. Otherwise, I felt like the story was really, really strong. The ending doesn't completely ruin Sailor Moon S, it just kind of comes off poor. But otherwise, the story and characters are done really well for Sailor Moon S, withstanding to the point that the ending of Sailor Moon S is just kind of weak. But overall, Sailor Moon S, in terms of the 3rd season of Sailor Moon, is really good. I'm looking forward to Sailor Moon Super S. Hopefully it's not an on-off series where Sailor Moon Supers turns into something like Sailor Moon R, where it was just kind of a week off season. But overall, Sailor Moon S is probably the strongest entry since Sailor Moon, and maybe even stronger, arguably. The only thing is that the fact that Sailor Moon just has that classic status that makes it like at the top tier, but other than that, Sailor Moon S is just really strong, and I really enjoyed it. So if you enjoyed the original Sailor Moon and you felt like Sailor Moon R was kind of weak, Sailor Moon S brings it back and is really strong in pretty much every aspect, withstanding to the ending to the story. But otherwise, I would highly recommend watching Sailor Moon S. It was very enjoyable. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.